We about to chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we can talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop. We got some things we could talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we could talk about. Come to the show. We about to chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we could talk about. Come to the show. We about to chop it up. Come to the show. We got some things we could talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we could talk about. Chop it up. Chop it. Chop it. Chop it up. Chop it up. Chop it. We got some things we could talk about. Good evening and welcome to the Chop Shop. I am your host, Pastor Marvin McKenstry Jr., and I'm excited as always to be bringing you the things that really matter to Baltimore. We have an exciting show lined up. I got to do something because I got this glare from this ring light on my glasses, and we ain't having that during the show. But we do have a dynamic show lined up with two people that you have heard from more than once on the Chop Shop, because in this particular topic and area of expertise, they are the subject matter experts. We're talking about none other than my brother from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, who is the Director of Policy, Mr. Dayvon Love, and the CEO, and I hope I got it right this time because I didn't call them everything from the president to a whole bunch of stuff, of the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police. That would be the one and only Mr. Clyde Boatwright. But before we get to any of that, I got to bring my man on the screen. He's my right hand, my left hand, my main man, the baddest producer in the land. That's right. I added some more to it, Mr. Shaka D Pitts. Shaq, there's been a lot going on, my brother. A whole lot going on, man. I'm talking about going in circles. Right when we're trying to celebrate Brother George Floyd, there's this Ma'Khia Bryant situation. Man, listen, there's a whole lot going on that's affecting our community, man. It's just a lot. It seems like you don't get time to breathe.
A lot of trauma, Marv. It's a lot of trauma. And what I'm seeing is I think I'm seeing a difficulty in our people dealing with the trauma. So it's a lot of that to process, a lot to digest. So yeah, it's a lot right now, Marv. But even before that, the good brother Wright.
Dante Wright. Is that I say it right?
Yeah,
I know I'm saying kind of a unique spelling. And I'm gonna be honest with you, man. I have abstained from social media, posting, commenting. Everybody know, man, I put miles on my heels out in these streets. And I'm always gonna say, unapologetically, I'm focused on the things that are plaguing Baltimore City. And that's my primary focus. And I found no value in being a social analyst as it becomes to these things, having to have an opinion on everything. Now, I'm not vilifying anybody else that feels as though that's the right direction for them to go. But in light of that, we are going to have a very candid conversation where we're going to bring some people together that just don't agree on the Ma'Khia Bryant situation. It'll be a special broadcast on Tuesday. It's so new. We don't even have artwork. We don't have a flyer yet. But it's going to be a barbershop style, candid conversation with some people. And we got some strong voices, man. We got the brother Sean.
Man. It's polarizing right now, Marv. It's polarizing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that that really kind of bothers me in the whole equation, shot, is the idea that, you can't have but one opinion if you black. You can't have but one perspective if you black. I've never been one to ascribe to that ideology. I think that we get to some of the greatest solutions in the world when we bring people together and give them their God-given right and privilege to disagree.
Well, Marv, that's we'll talk about it on the show, but that's part of our problem as a whole, and it's not just with now. We've had it with politics. We've had it with politics. We've had it with a lot of decisions that come to the Black community. A lot of people feel like it's just it's just one thing, right? It's just one face or one voice or one idea. And the diaspora is so much more than that. So
the thing that's scaring me, and I'm gonna be honest with you, is this idea that we gotta ascribe to narratives above everything else. for me, I've always been an analytical person before I knew what analytical was. And I'm the type of person that, I want to look at it. I want to examine it. I want to see what it is, and then, if I feel as though it's healthy or it's going to do somebody some good, I'll share my perspective. But we got a great show tonight with two people who don't particularly agree surrounding the thing that we're going to talk about. So the Chop Shop leads the way in making sure that we have these conversations that everybody else wants to silence unless you have a certain opinion for their platform. So before we get to that, we got some housekeeping. As always, we started off with our Stop the Beef hotline because we know that Baltimore's major issue is the violence, where we have people who are dying over $5 dice games. And that's a literal situation without me going into detail. A young man who I had great respect for lost his life over an argument that literally ensued from a $5 disagreement in the dice game. We still praying for his family and all, but y'all, we got to do what we got to do, put some wheels on our heels and get in these streets and do what we can. And the We Are Us movement with the Stop the Beef hotline has taken the lead. Those two numbers that are listed on that flyer is somebody to answer those numbers 24/7. A man is going to respond and come, and we do whatever's necessary, even raise money out of our own pockets to see to it that a life doesn't have to be taken. I go and I talk to people on the other side of that flyer. When you have it, is the 10-point agreement called the Baltimore Peace Agreement. I tell brothers all the time when I'm walking the streets, just because even if we got to eat in the street, we don't have to die in these streets. Even if we have to eat, if I don't have something to offer you and you got to feed your family, we're going to get to that point. But even if you got to eat in the streets, you ain't got to die in the streets. No, I'm not giving them a license to sell drugs or do anything else, but we got to do something to stop the killing. Next up, we got a couple of announcements that we're going to make today. Shaq, you've been posting something about some mentorship and some other good stuff, man, that you ain't give to me for me to be able to cover tonight. So I'm going to make you have to talk about it.
Fair enough. So I have a nonprofit organization called Black People Ride Bikes, and we are taking 10 youth from Baltimore to Colorado, to Winter Gardens, Colorado, for mountain bike championships. So
that's dope.
So it's not even about the racing, right? It's not even about the racing. What it is we've been allotted 10 slots from USA Cycling.
That's
right?
dope.
So these kids don't have to pay for the experience. Once they get there, they don't have to pay for the experience. They get the ride if they want to ride. They get the race if they want to race. And if they race and they win, they keep moving on. They keep moving on. So if they win a championship, they win it on the arm just for the strength of going there and doing their thing. But it's bigger than that. We're just trying to get 10 youth to travel to the other side of the country. We're trying to get 10 youth to get outside of Baltimore. We're trying to get 10 youth to get an experience, a transformative experience that they haven't had to this point, and something that can impact the rest of their lives. So that's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to raise $10,000 right now in the whole, but we're also we're in the Black Futures Micro Grant competition. So we're currently leading that competition right now. We have until the 26th of this month. So if you're trying to vote for us, if you want to try to support the GoFundMe, it'll all be on, actually just go to blackpeopleridebikes.com. That's the easiest way. Email blackpeopleridebikes@gmail.com. We're trying to support the youth, Marv. We're trying to get in where we fit in, be the cog in the machine.
That's what it is, man. So I'm gonna need everybody to check that out. You're gonna see it up on my page. We doing something new tonight, man. We broadcasting not only on Facebook tonight, we broadcasting on YouTube. We're about to make a hard shift to try to build it up over there. And of course, that makes sharing these great conversations and shows that much more easy. Moving to the next thing that I want to talk about, we got a Peace in the Streets walk coming up with the We Are Us men's movement. That's going to be on this Saturday. We're going to be meeting at the corner of Baltimore and Gilmore. That's in that Western District, where there's been a whole bunch of heat lately. And we're going to go down there, man. We're going to put our boots on the ground. We're going to offer job opportunities. We're going to offer drug treatment support opportunities, conflict resolution right there where it exists, and mental health support. So I need all the men to come out 12 o'clock on Saturday. We're going to meet up right there. Come as you are. but come intended on engaging the community. We spend time talking to the people that are right there at ground zero, and we want to make sure that we are offering them opportunities. We are well over, in 2 years, well over 1,000 people placed in employment opportunities. And this is verified stuff with the employers who given us feedback. We built a business partnership that literally empowered us to be able to send 15 people who we met on our last two walks, last Saturday and last Monday, where we were in my beloved neighborhood, the Po Homes. Everybody we met was able to interview yesterday. We had 13 out of the 15 people that were scheduled show up for the interviews. And we got really, really great results as all 13 were offered an opportunity. So we're going to continue to do this great work. Monday, we're going to be back in the Po Homes. You'll see a flyer on my page for that. Lastly, before we get to this great conversation, we have our Black History and the Making segment. And I was really, really deliberate about this one. We are celebrating, and that's right, we celebrating our very own Nick and Maryland Mosby. I know y'all talking about they under investigation and all of that. I'm tired of you pulling out your shotgun, putting our young Black leaders out of misery because you disagree. I will be the first person, if the investigation is what it is, to say, okay, there should be some accountability. But why can't we look at two young Black people who have ascended to the top of their professions, and they do it with style and class, and providing a great example for our young people. Now, if the young people sitting around watching the news and they understand investigation and all of that sort of thing, okay, I give you that. But what they can see is that these are two strong Black young people that look like everyday Black people in Baltimore that have ascended to the height of their profession. So we want to give you the chop shop salute, Madam State's Attorney, brother President of City Council, and we praying for them because there's a whole family attached to whatever it is that's going on, and y'all don't know the details. So get your mouth up off them. Thank you for your contribution to our community and your continued service. All right. Now that all that's out the way, all of it is out the way, I got two brothers here with me that really don't need no introduction. And I don't think this conversation is going to be no whole bunch of Q&A tonight because we just going to chop it up the way we chop it up. History was made about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks. I don't know. I should have looked at the date before we came on the air. As finally, for some and really for others, we got a veto override from, okay, so there was a passing of the bill in the House and the Senate, and a veto in the governor's mansion, a veto override that led to the passing of what is being pretty much hailed as historic police reform in the state of Maryland that includes the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And we had two people here who are true subject matter experts. And for the next, 45 minutes, we are going to hear from them. I'm going to do my best to not be in the way to help you first and foremost understand what this really means and to be able to speak the voices from opposite sides. Now, I'm going to tell you this about these brothers. Both of them love Baltimore. Both of them advocate in the communities of Baltimore. They educate, they enlighten people, and they have both put their time in service. They are two good brothers. The first one that I want to bring on the screen, again, you heard me say it earlier, he's the director of policy for a think tank, a Black think tank full of brilliant young Black people. I've had the opportunity to work with him in many different facets. He is the great and awesome brother of mine, Mr. Dayvon Love. Thank you for joining the Chop Shop again, bro. Excited to have you here.
Always a pleasure, bro.
All right, and next we got this brother. We marched the streets of Baltimore playing drums. I get to call him Chip. Y'all don't get to call him that, though. Y'all better call him Sergeant, Mr. President, CEO. But he is a true advocate and a great man who really, I love him because he stands firm on his convictions. He does his job as an advocate for police in the state of Maryland. He's really ascended to the heights of that profession that, you know, are just awesome. He's the one and only Mr. Clyde Boatwright. Thank you for coming on to the Chop Shop again, brother. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you now.
All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me.
So I'm excited about this conversation. I'm sure it's going to be rich and it's going to be enlightening. And normally, probably around about this time, I would probably start with Dayvon, but I'm going to shift it a little bit tonight because I want to go ahead and start with Clyde. We had a real opportunity. I think we was on the phone, wound up on the phone for about an hour, man, just kind of unpacking some of this stuff. Talk to us about what happened. You sent me a very insightful YouTube video of the actual day and the time that the vote took place. Talk to us about what actually happened on that day from the perspective of someone who advocates for police officers here in Baltimore. In the state.
Yeah, so there was a push. I would say it's a national push from going from state to state for police reform, and to us, it appears to be a cookie cutter type of reform push, and there's an attempt to fit everyone in the same box. The language is the same advocacy groups. From a national perspective, are linking together with some of the local groups and using their millions and millions of dollars to advocate for these significant changes in policing without having a care or an understanding of what the officer's perspective, who was charged with that responsibility of carrying out these asks. I look at it, this was not a thing about police reform. This was clearly about police revenge. There was an attempt for the people involved to legislate outcomes as opposed to working together for solutions. But hey, the law is what it is, and we'll follow the law each time. So if it causes our police officers to be less involved in communities, because that's what the advocacy groups call for, and the lawmakers passed those laws, then we'll fall in line with what the requests are, and we'll make sure that we follow the law each time.
So let me swing up to you, Dayvon, because I know the history of this thing was one where an overwhelming outcome of people who were associated with this organization we know as the Fraternal Order of Police would show up, and we talking historically, would show up in Annapolis and pretty much what to many people's opinion drown out any other voice with lobbying power. He mentioned having millions of dollars in these groups, but having lobbying power. Talk to us about how we got here, and be sure to include what was a little bit of how it used to go, how it went before this historic change.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna do like a 10,000 foot, 1,000 foot, and then kind of on the ground. So bigger picture, it's really important for people to be clear about the Fraternal Order of Police as an institution. And I know that's one of the things we talked a little bit about last time. The history of the advocacy of the institution of the Fraternal Order of Police has been to undermine the activity of Black people fighting for justice for Black people. Whether you look at many of the Black, political prisoners, who were framed, and if you look back at many of the research that's been done, you look at Eddie Conway, you look at Assata Shakur, you look at a variety of other freedom fighters for Black people who the Fraternal Order of Police has demonized, right, as an institution. I mentioned last time that in a text that the FOP published, I believe in the 80s, that looked at the advocacy of the FOP from 1915 to the mid-70s. And one of the things that they advocated against as a institution, they characterized it was the ACLU, SCLC, SNCC, NAACP as their advocacy for community oversight as anti-police and anti-American, as communist plots. This is the way that they were characterized. And so as a result of the community who during the middle 60s, remember, there are a bunch of urban rebellions around the country. Many of them the result of police killings of Black people. And so what emerged from many of those urban rebellions was calls for community control, from which the FOP as an institution fought virulently against, right? So it's important that we put that context there, right? Because the Fraternal Order of Police is an institution. there are individual Black people that you and I know, that those of us on the screen know, who are, police officers who are doing a job, and we don't characterize all of them individually as bad people. But we're talking about an institution that has allowed the institution of law enforcement to structure itself in such a way where there's day-to-day harm that's done to the community by law enforcement, that has been done, over decades, that we have evidence for. So this isn't conjecture. This isn't people just complaining. There are a bunch of reports now that document the extent to which law enforcement has caused harm to the community. And so much of the work on the ground with folks like myself and others has been about how to empower the community to have control over the institution of law enforcement. So that's I think that's important context generally. Now, one thing that I think Clyde and I can agree on, though I think we get there different ways, which does matter, is that we are in a moment where social justice and racial justice credibility comes with social capital that people take advantage of. And there's a whole lot of opportunism that I think is afoot as it relates to the issue of policing and law enforcement, particularly as people connect it to issues of racial justice. And it is my opinion that while there are folks within the Maryland General Assembly that do genuinely care about issues of policing and addressing the violence that Black people face, there's certainly an incentive for those who haven't spoken up on the issue previously to now come up and speak on the issue. I would take issue with the characterization of it as anti-police. And the reason that I take issue with that characterization is because when you look at the way that our society is configured, police budgets have increased, tremendously over the past 3 or 4 decades.
The one in
right?
Baltimore recently increased another, $28 million.
Exactly. And with that and this is something that's been brought up a year. So I know there's kind of this recent emergence where, philanthropy adjacent advocates are talking, and it's becoming more mainstream. But this is something that folks have been talking about for a while. The issue of how much bigger the police budget is compared to other kinds of things. And so the reason why I bring that up is because what has happened is that our institutions have become dependent on a configuration where police officers are serving roles that don't make sense for them to serve. And so what we are seeing is people calling for alternatives. So when people show up, so even the work that you do, Brother Marvin, with the We Are Us, right? Like, to me, when we talk about defund police, we're talking about we need to shift resources in the hands of brothers like you and the brothers that you work with as a part of how we understand the most effective way to deal with our communities, right? To a place where police at best are the last resort, or at worst the last resort, at best obsolete, right? And it's important that we understand that we want to move away from being reliant on police officers, right? Last thing I'll say, just on the particular reforms that passed, I think it was progress. The biggest piece of progress, I think, was Anton's Law, to be able to get the investigatory files of law enforcement officers so the public can play some semblance of an oversight role, the ability to know what's happening within law enforcement. So it doesn't take a federal investigation for us to find out that people are being, recklessly strip searched, being, drugs being planted on them. Like, we don't want, we don't want a situation where, that's not information the public has. But what we were missing is community oversight. There's more community participation, but not community oversight, not the ability for there to be a community control entity with the power to impose discipline. It's similar to, we think about the CRB in Baltimore City, right? Where it can investigate, but it doesn't have any power to dispense discipline. And I think ultimately what the community wants is the ability to have power so that if a complaint comes and someone's harmed, the community has the power to do something about it because it's supposed to serve us, right? So I'll leave it at that.
We are with the Chop Shop. We come to you every Thursday at 6 p.m. Today we have Mr. Dayvon Love, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, Director of Policy and the CEO of the Maryland FOP. Clyde, I got to come back to you, Mr. Clyde Boatwright. I got to come back to you because can you break down some of the reforms? And I want you to break down some of the reforms that from the perspective of a police officer, and I'm just really unpacking the conversation that you and I already had from the perspective of police officers that you disagree with. And I want you to talk a little bit about how it unpacks from that perspective.
So I'll start where Mr. Love talked about the MPIA bill, which is Senate Bill 178. The personnel records of a police officer are just that. They're personnel records. We don't have access to personnel records of teachers or firefighters of politicians or any other entity in the function of city government. But we want access to the personnel records of our police officers. I'll give you an example. Under this law, we deal with a cancel culture. And so the way that the law is written, our police officers will never be able to expunge their record of an allegation. So I'll use Winchester Apartments, Marvin, which you're familiar with. If you're a police officer and you're in a specialized unit and you are charged with the responsibility of making arrests for drugs, and you make, let's say, an arrest in the Winchester Apartments, and I'm reading the comment that So if you make an arrest in the Winchester Apartment, and then you make a second arrest, defense attorneys are saying, "Hey, both of you guys file a complaint against the officer and make the same allegation." So once those two allegations come in, if you come back again and make a third arrest, now you've got three complaints of the same thing. And what the advocates will tell you, oh, that's an early warning sign. The officer has to be doing something wrong because he's got three complaints of the same thing. It has to be wrong. When in fact, we know defense attorneys are telling people this is the way to get you off if you just file a complaint and say that the officer did something. I find it ironic in the same legislative session that we went through, we went above and beyond to expunge the records of people criminally convicted in court. But in the same session, we had the same lawmakers vote to prevent police officers who have an allegation that is unfounded and untrue. We vote to not allow them to ever expunge their record. So, you'll have, I get the idea of trying to create a pattern in practice. However, if you have an allegation of one thing in 2021 and you don't do the same thing again until 2028, how is that a pattern in practice? And if both are not founded and unsustained, so how is that a pattern in practice?
So let me ask you this for the sake of my own ignorance, Clyde, because being a person that does have a city job, right, or having any job, right, mm-hmm. I'm hearing you, and I'm thinking in the context of my job. If a person comes and a complaint happens, because I think the one thing that differs is you saying the defense attorney is saying this is a way for you to get off, right?
Correct.
But if we're talking about the people who are charged with investigating crime and investigating everything else, who have kind of advocated on the side of continuing to be able to investigate themselves, if an investigation, if they have the power to investigate the complaint and it's repeatedly not sustained, what are we concerned about, right? So let me finish the question. What are we concerned about in the sense that the allegation remains in the file, right? But it's repeatedly unsustained or whatever. And doesn't that show a pattern that is not particularly a negative pattern, but something that may expose that defense attorney or may expose? I'm kind of confused because if in fact the officer is if repeatedly unsustained, what's the problem?
So what happens is the cancel culture will say that officer has, and let's say the allegation is excessive force. He's got 19 complaints of excessive force over a 3-year period. He has to be doing something wrong. So he did it, so you're guilty before you're even found in some sort of adjudicatory process. You're guilty based off of cancel culture because of the amount of complaints you have, not sustained complaints. And that's the way that these situations are playing out throughout the country. And, hey, again, we have to follow the law. And so if you want our police officers our officers have to really, really think, is the juice worth the squeeze? Really, when you get into these use of force situations, because now based on the use of force policy, an officer can be sent to jail for violating a policy. So that's another one that gives us a little bit of heartache. But again, hey, the term is you give the community the law enforcement agencies that they want. If they want a hands-off police department, that's what you give them. You just go hands off.
Dayvon, I want to give you the opportunity to give redress to what he just said, because I'm not. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So four things. One is that one of the things that the FOP would consistently in testimony in Annapolis, they would make arguments about false allegations. And what I have said, and one of the things that has been put to us in the past is, what is the evidence that this problem is a problem that is substantial enough that it should impact a policy decision? And none of the professional advocates of the Fraternal Order Police that testified in Annapolis have provided no evidence that this is something that would be such a problem. And much of the research that's been done on issues of police complaints show that most people are actually reticent to file complaints because of their fear of law enforcement and fear of retaliation, right? So I would want to see evidence that this is a consistent problem. Whereas, and this leads into my second point, we have a bunch of evidence of the ways in which police officers investigating themselves have led there to be complaints that should be sustained and should result in action that have not. And that's just a matter of the Graham report that came out, about a month ago, the Baltimore City Department of Justice report. I mean, the information is just there, and the examples that is provided of unsustained complaints that would have otherwise been sustained had they been subject to public scrutiny. The other piece is that, as the brother Shaka alluded to, because we're not just talking about comparing profession to profession, as much as we're saying that the history of law enforcement, like the actual history of the way that it's been able to dispense violence against the community with relatively no repercussions. It is the exception and not the rule that when an officer does something that all of us would agree is problematic, that it is the exception and not the rule that they're accountable for. Right. And so I think the balance of it is to provide those investigatory files. And then lastly, the comparison about expungement. I think we got to be crystal clear. We live in a society that regardless of what we see on the popular media, there was a Goucher poll that was done a few months ago that the state commission, Restoring Trust and Policing Commission, cited, where it said about 3/4 of Marylanders had either neutral or positive associations of law enforcement as a profession. So we have to be clear that we live in a society where police officers, by and large, are valorized and are understood as above a reproach. And that when we talk about expungement, we're talking about the fact that there are Black people who are trapped millions upon millions, trapped into the criminal justice system, who were denied opportunities to be employed as a result of the phenomenon of mass incarceration. Law enforcement is not, people say law enforcement is under attack, but you compare it, I mean, it is a major institution with lots of millions of dollars themselves as an institution, and so to characterize them in the same breath as Black people in America, it's just not a sufficient analogy. And in fact, law enforcement are more likely to be believed. I mean, if we remember before the disclosure of the gun trace task force, you and I were here. In fact, all of us were hearing about what was happening with the gun trace task force, but because it wasn't a federal trial that it was put on display, no one would be believed. Like the names of those officers are people who a lot of us knew the names of those officers before it was public, but because they're police, no one was going to believe it. And so I think the expungement piece, just for me, just doesn't apply here.
So I would like to respond to that, Marv.
What you waiting for?
Oh, okay. I saw the split screen. So it's these live graphics. First of all, this is the chop shop, so we're going to keep it all the way real. I've been a cop going on 21 years, and the last person that I want to speak to in any investigation is the Internal Affairs Division. That's the last person. I don't want to ever go into that office. So there's a realistic fear among police officers of the Internal Affairs Division. So this notion that the police policing the police and all of that, we don't, look, that is a total separate entity that we don't commingle. We don't hang out together. They have their own set of rules, and we don't even associate ourselves with internal affairs. So I want to kill that notion, and I want to bring it to where the ghost can get it. We don't deal with an IID. We don't. We just don't. As a police officer, the last person you want to talk to is internal affairs. The first time you get called in, you look. I'm going to use whatever rights I have available to not talk to ID. We just don't associate. So let's kill that there's this let's under the table shake hands and I'm going to go ahead and clear you. No, if the facts are sustained, they are sustained. And under the current LEOBR, you can never get a sustained complaint taken out of your records. However, in the same breath, we've now added non-sustained cases, and we've now added allegations that are untrue and unfounded to that level that can't be expunged. And so what we do have is we have studies that show, because listen, Marv, Dayvon, we are all smart. Let's not fool the public. We can make a gaucho poll or whatever poll say we wanted what we wanted to say. We can make whatever statistics say whatever we wanted to say. We can target certain demographics to make the statistics fit what we want our narrative. So let's talk about that. The Gun Trace Task Force, those guys were criminal, and you know what? They knew if they did something around a police officer like me or countless others that I can name, that they were going to jail. And what happened? It took the criminal justice system to bring justice to them. Look, and none of us stood up and say those guys were right. Those guys needed to be defended. The FOP didn't spend one dime defending these guys. They are in federal prison right where they belong. But it has to take members of the public to come forward. And so what those guys did, those guys robbed drug dealers, those guys robbed regular citizens, and they treated everybody the same. And those guys are in federal prison where they belong. But why should we all suffer for the actions of a few? What we can show, the data does show that we want to ignore, is that the discipline of police officers that are in protected classes is higher in policing than any other demographic across the board. Officers of color and people that fall under protected classes get disciplined more harshly than other people. And that showed. It came out in the report that was done with the Maryland State Police. There's other documents to show that police discipline is unbalanced in this state. And so to now say we're going to subject our officers to more scrutiny without having more oversight over our police chiefs and our sheriffs, because I don't know if you guys knew this, the police chief, well, I'm quite sure this has been talked about. The police chiefs and sheriffs sided with the ACLU and others and say, hey, let's support Senate Bill 627 that gives us all the power. We want all the power. And that was the talking points coming in the door, that the chiefs, we all agree with the chiefs, the chiefs and sheriffs and the ACLU, we in lockstep, we agree that we need to pass Senate Bill 627. And we like, ho, that's not fair. That's not, you're giving the same people who already have the power and authority more power. And there was no bills to hold the police chiefs and sheriffs accountable for any of their wrongdoings. When we have a gun trace task force, why? Because they put dope and guns on the table, and the supervisors were hailed as criminal justice champions, and the police commanders were hailed as tough on crime. And when those guys put dope and guns on the table, everybody praised them and turned their head a blind eye to what they were doing. That wasn't the rank and file officers doing that. That was police supervision.
Yeah, I mean, so a few things. One is that, you know, I can't dispute your own experience in terms of, you know, internal affairs, right? What I will say though is that when you look not just at the gun trace task force, but when you look at other incidences of police misconduct, I mentioned the DOJ report that found examples where officers that, for instance, were strip searching. There was an older gentleman who was strip searched several times in West Baltimore on the same corner. And the information that the person who wrote a complaint, who was being strip searched, matched the description of the officer for whom was patrolling that area at the time that the complainant said they were strip searched. And that was deemed as unsustained. If you read the Graham report that came out of Prince George's County, where it talked about some of the derogatory things that were said about Black people who were folks who were on the force in Prince George's County, right? Where when investigations were made of these allegations, that they were unsustained. So while I think it's true that folks have mixed experiences, I think it's important for us to talk about the institution itself. And a part of what is missing, and I think I've said this to you before, that I think when you talk about the police chiefs and sheriffs, they bear responsibility on perpetrating the kinds of abuses in our community. But the FOP has just as much of a role in that, because the FOP has led the way in the kinds of policies that have shielded the public from meaningful participation in discipline. And the reason why that matters, and you mentioned the polls, I mentioned the Gotcha poll because that was kind of the first one I thought of. In the report that I mentioned, that is a legislatively commissioned report, it also cites a similar set of polls from Morgan State, from Morgan State, where it also says that many of the people, while they had, I think it was a little less than 3/4, it might have been around 60%, had neutral or positive feelings about law enforcement, that also a majority of them had negative experiences or had witnessed negative interactions with law enforcement, which undermined their ability to trust police officers, right? And so I say that because I think, based on, you know, the comments you made earlier about, you know, the police reform bills both in Maryland and around the country being police revenge, I think we got to be clear that we're talking about, I mean, and particularly when I think about the Morgan State poll, which a lot of the folks that they are interviewing are homeowners, right? So these aren't like, you know, people my age, you know what I'm saying, people who are transient, you know, we're talking about homeowners who are the people who call the police, even though they don't trust them. And so in terms of the perception of police, I think while the media projects one thing, I think the reality is very different on the ground. And I think the average person, when I mentioned the bloated police budget of Baltimore City, the average person says that's too much money. When you talk to the average person about, you know, the impact or relationship between police and the community, most people say, yeah, I don't trust the police. And it requires us to look at it as a system. And again, I'll refer to this commission's report again. One of the things they say, that many of the respondents who said, what would it take for them to trust in law enforcement? It will require them to be involved in the process of oversight and the ability to get information about how police are disciplined. That was what the report said. And so to me, that's a bare minimum. Like, a bare minimum is being able to see how police are disciplined, especially given the history. And I'll end on this. I just think it's important that we acknowledge that there is a history of, and it's not just police killings, because I think too often the television, we focus on police killings. I'm talking about, we know that there are folks who, you know, treat the community, police officers who treated the community poorly. And because of the level of protections that they have had, know that they're not likely to receive any consequences. And maybe there's certain people that they wouldn't do that stuff around, but nearly not enough to stop it from happening and being a very regular occurrence. It just so happens that I think we live in a society that doesn't regard the humanity of regular folk in the community, because they already see folks as criminals. So it's actually, there's a woman named Sylvia Winters. She wrote a piece called No Humans Involved. And she talks about how after the LA riots, one of the things that an officer was heard saying on the walkie-talkie when they were going to the scene of a homicide, the code word for it was no humans involved. That was the way they characterized a homicide. Because and what she argues is that that's the mentality. That's the mentality, unfortunately, not just of white police officers, but our own people who police our communities that don't regard our community. So I would argue that given that fact, given that history, it's not conjecture at this point. I don't think anyone at this point can dispute the history of that. And its contemporaneous nature of it. I think we need as a community the ability to hold them accountable. Otherwise, we'd be doing the same thing.
So let me say this, because what I want to say to Clyde is, hearing about the stuff now that, because I never heard in the past, and at least since 2016, when some of my work closer involved in police reform, as I've always admitted that my primary work was as a youth advocate, and working with youth brought me into police reform. I never heard about that internal stuff. And I ain't talking about the IID stuff. I'm talking about where it seems like a new thing now, this push to hold people who are in the higher positions accountable as the reasoning behind what we've had historically has been bad policing. It seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me up until now, what we've had is police as an agency walking lockstep while keeping those internal discrepancies pretty much out of the public view. And now, since we've come to this place where we have real reform, it's like they're saying, man, y'all got to look at the leaders. The leaders have been the issue all this time.
Well, because the leaders have said that the FOP it's so easy to throw the FOP in the labor organization, because they know they throw us under the bus on a regular basis. They know that our whole issue is due process rights of our police officers. We're not getting into the guilt or innocence. That's not our role. Our role is simply make sure the officer has a fair trial. Fair trial. That's it.
So hold on, because when we talking about the history here in Baltimore, the Bob Cherries and we have literally seen public, and I know Lodge 3 is not your statewide, but we've seen Lodge 3 literally publicly paint itself as the evil empire in places where we know that that probably the better thing would have been to just stay silent. I'm talking, if you're a Baltimore City resident, you have seen the ugly of this local FOP organization. So to me, the characterization isn't so far left as we would suppose.
So I'm not here, and I don't ever want to be here to speak on behalf of someone. So that's whatever their assessments are, whatever they decide to do, that's on them.
Well, we talking FOP because you guys advocated together. Y'all met up in all of the different agencies around the state met up and literally had power and legislation together over time. So I'm not asking you to speak for them, but you were speaking with them all that time.
So not all of that time. When you say all of that time,
I'm talking about the organization, not Clyde particularly.
No. I want to be clear in this. The Maryland State FOP is comprised of 77 lodges with 21,000 members. The individual local organizations speak on behalf of their local members. We speak on behalf of everyone. So whatever decisions, it's just like I was not, the most popular person when the guns in school issue was going about, but I was speaking for my members. And so there was nobody should have been held accountable for the statements that I made coming from my local lodge, because that's who we spoke on behalf of our membership. And you have to speak on behalf of the demographic that elects you. And so the conversations that our brothers and sisters at Lodge 3 has, or versus the conversations of Lodge 4 in Baltimore County or Prince George's County, those are elected leaders that speak for their membership. And so yes, we all speak together when it comes to statewide issues, but when it comes to their local issues, they're going to speak, and they should continue to speak on issues that are matters.
So let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to ice you out of the conversation, Dayvon, but so when the cry for Baltimoreans prior to us getting the historic reforms that we've gotten now has been give Baltimore a carve out because we got unique issues here and that sort of thing. The state rallied around not giving Baltimore that carve out that we wanted, for Baltimore to be looked at separately from what happened in state policy and state law because of the unique issues. The state, that 21,000, that brotherhood rallied around not seeing that happen. So when we talking about, because again, you're right. I said as they would respond to local issues, but we are talking about what traditionally has been this total unified front, man. And now I'm saying, me and my sister, we both drank up all the Kool-Aid, but if she had the last glass when mommy get home, she did it. You know what I'm saying? That's what it feels like to me.
No. We're not throwing anybody under the bus and saying that we're separate. We're saying that we speak for the global, for the statewide members of this organization. The local presidents, which I'm a local president, speaks for my entity. And so whatever the collective view of my entity. So, and again, you just talked about your brother, your sister drinking the Kool-Aid. We're now saying in the state of Maryland is that your sister drank the Kool-Aid and I'm the parent, I'm going to beat both of you because she drank the last glass of Kool-Aid. So I'm gonna hold you all accountable for which that one particular sibling did.
Because it sends a message to all the kids.
Well, you know what? Okay. And you know what? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dayvon.
Here's the thing. I mean, the FOP has an overwhelming history of dehumanization of Black people, both in terms of policy advocacy, in terms of the positions they've taken. The history is undeniable, and the reason why I'm bringing that up is because when we think, matter of fact, the last time we was on together, you said that you supported civilian oversight, right? And the thing is that when I'm in Annapolis testifying, the Fraternal Order of Police is testifying against civilian oversight. That's been their consistent position for decades. And so to Marvin's point, at least the way that I'm taking it is that, but what Marvin is describing as what the FOP has said, calling Black youth criminals, disparaging Baltimoreans along lines that are clearly imbued with notions of white supremacy. It's clear to me that that's the overwhelming position the FOP's taken. You know what I'm saying? And so so for me, while it's good for you to come on for us to talk and have a real conversation, that don't account for the impact that the institution has had negatively, on our community. And I just don't know. There's no way around that. That's just the reality of the institution and what it has been.
So we coming down the stretch. I want to give both of you guys to give us the opportunity. I don't know, man. Sometimes these shows just seem like they're not long enough. But I do appreciate both of you coming on to be able to talk about these issues. And of course, we'll be back. There's some things happening in the country, and hopefully you guys will be able to kind of give some analysis. Thank God it's not here. Don't want to see anybody hurt. But if I can get you guys to come on anytime to just give some analysis on what we're seeing, because we just seen a historic verdict, and it's historic to those of us that watched 30 years ago Rodney King's videotape beating yield no results, no convictions. Freddie Gray yield no convictions, and we seen a conviction on all charges in the Derek Chauvin case. So I would like for you guys to be able to come back and to kind of unpack some of what we're seeing happen in history, which is not such an adversarial conversation, but that's just because I have great respect for y'all. But Clyde, if you can go ahead and give us just whatever your closing thoughts are.
My closing thoughts are simple. I've heard a lot about situations and data supporting actions of police officers in the 1970s. I've heard the 80s. I've heard the 90s. I've heard stuff about conversations during the LA riots. All of this stuff happened when I was in high school. The stuff that happened in the 80s, I was at Lamel as a student. And I've been in policing for 21 years this year. So I'm saying that to say this. With every profession, policing is evolving. You're now, Marvin, now you're seeing the police union now saying, you're pointing the finger at us, but the whole time you're giving your selected leaders a pass because they are in charge of the culture and climate. They are in charge of whether or not people are out here committing offenses or not. And again, it's about the optics. I have a Facebook post of the situation that happened in Columbus, Ohio on my Facebook page, garnered 371 comments. And it's basically split right down the middle on what people think about that situation. And so to tell me the untrained eye has to have oversight over the decision-making of a police officer who 10 seconds out of this car was confronted with a deadly force situation. And when you're charged with the responsibility of defending yourself and others, and you make a decision, it's split right down the middle. And you're now telling me that the oversight is of people who have no knowledge or no understanding of what you were trained to do in that situation. That's where the problem is going to come in when we talk about use of force and other situations. We want civilian participation and civilian input on all of this stuff. We've always advocated for that this year. However, you want people to have a trained eye to look in on these situations.
Dayvon?
So I was the two things. One is I think part of the issue, any industry that is able to regulate itself is prone to corruption. And I think it's the trained eyes that have been the status quo that has precipitated a lot of what we see in our community that existed 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way up until today. And I think, again, the data, both in terms of, the reports that I've mentioned that provide us concrete data and just the experience of people in the community, I think make it clear that when we talk about the issue of policing, we're talking about the issue of an institution that's been allowed to largely regulate itself. And I want to speak a little bit to the 60-year-old sister in Columbus, Ohio, that was killed, and just say briefly, I think it's important for us to be clear that we in a society structured on racism and white supremacy that undermines the humanity of people of African descent. We see the same pattern over and over and over again, where the lives of Black people are deemed to be less valuable than non-Black people. And I think the conversation about what happened in Columbus, Ohio, I think when we try to get into the details of what happened, I think a lot of times it takes away from the substance of the conversation, which is how valuable is that 16-year-old sister that is a priority that she lived. And when a person decides, I'm talking as a person who I was a high school teacher in public school in Baltimore City, right? As a person and has done a variety of other, activity with youth, in Baltimore City, dealing with people that have weapons and fights and all that. And when I decide that I'm going to be in the lives of young people, I'm deciding that I value their life enough that that's a part of what I am committing to. I'm committing to saying that my life is going to come after the lives of these young people. And I think the outcry on the sister who was killed in Columbus, it's triggering the fact that Black people constantly, and particularly sisters in this case, are feeling like their lives are not prioritized, particularly young girls. And so when we talk about the issue of policing, there are lots of other issues in our community that are issues, and lots of us are working on those other issues. But I think we should use that story for us to understand and be clear about the fact that our young people in our communities constantly are getting messages where they're being told that lives are not valued, whether it's the communities they live in or how they're treated, the fact that people treat them like adults and don't give them the care they deserve. And so we need to build institutions and protocols that value that. And it's clear that the ones that we currently have do not. And it's clear that the institutions that deem themselves having the expertise to do that have not effectively done it. And so it's clear, I think, to most people that something different has to be done. We're moving in that direction, and it's just more work to do.
Well, again, I want to thank both of you guys for coming on and joining me. I'm excited as whenever you guys come on. Next week on the 29th, on Thursday, we're going to have a conversation with three of my absolute favorite leaders in the Baltimore faith community, Pastor Clayvon Burston, Dr. Lisa Weir, and Bishop Brian Martin, the one and only, is going to join us as we have this conversation about post-COVID church. And this conversation is going to be about what it's like trying to reopen churches and get people to come back. We have celebrated our mastery of technology and our ability to take the message outside of the four walls. Now, are the people going to make a mass exodus to come back and participate in some of the more traditional means that we had? Don't forget to join us. The flyer will be coming out soon. Join us Tuesday as we're going to have a town hall style discussion around the Micaiah Bryant shooting. There's been Facebook posts. Again, I have reserved any judgment or any commentary. Many people know, some people don't know. I own a security agency. I certify and I license people in firearms. So I have a perspective that is probably very unique because I know what police level training looks like for somebody who wields a firearm and can find themselves in those situations. But we're going to have a conversation, town hall style. You guys in the audience will be able to join the conversation, in some cases live on the screen. But we're going to have Mr. Darnell Wharton, who is Brother Ceasefire. We're going to have Mr. Sean Price, who himself takes no tea for the fever and has been very adamant that he does not believe that the police officer was wrong. So you want to show up here Tuesday at 6:00 for the special edition, and we're going to talk about the Micaiah Bryant situation. I want to bring my right hand, my left hand, my main man, the baddest producer in the land, Mr. Shaka Pitts, on the screen. Thank you as always, bro, for your amazing contribution to everything that we do here at the Chop Shop. Y'all, again, don't forget, we did for the first time broadcast live on Facebook. Our Facebook page is the Chop Shop Be More. I'm going to share the link on our Facebook page. Man, the world is open back up. We ain't got as many people in this kind of weather sitting in the house looking at their TV, but we still want to bring the information, knowing that people will get to it when they have time to get to it. So continue to stay locked in and plugged in here with the Chop Shop. We're going to listen. Always tell you, we ain't going to bring you no scandal or none of the topics that people think is sexy, but we're going to bring you the valuable information so that you are informed as to what's taking place here in the city of Baltimore. Thank you, Clyde. Thank you, Dayvon. I look forward to future conversations with you guys. Shaka, there's only one thing left to say, man. Take me home.
I can be more. There's nothing that I can't achieve if I just believe. You can be more. You can make every dream a reality. We can be more.
Be more, I pray I be more. It's easy to achieve anything you believe. Like hold your head high, girl, you got a reason to breathe. I see a rare mind, boy, you got a reason to dream. Let's take flight, give the children a reason to see redemption. We grow up in the jacks where it's evil and wicked, where the people with success don't want to send you a visit, but we still finna make this life worth living. Now throw your hands to the sky if you feel it. Hey, throw your hands to the sky if you the realest. You got a vision, let's put them pistols away and make sure the OGs keep the community safe. In the world where the ladies crying, the babies dying, I think we can create that space to make a way for the ladies to ride and make baby giants. Be more, believe, let's play. I'm so in love with life.